Well, the anniversary is close of the JFK assassination, and truth be told, today we're stepping back in time into one of the most pivotal but often misunderstood moments connected to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the murder of Dallas Police Officer J.D. Tippit. While history tends to focus on the Daley Plaza, Tippit murder remains a crucial piece of the puzzle. It's the event that triggered the manhunt, the chase, the gun drawn inside the Texas theater, and it holds secrets that many believe unlock the truth about what happened on November 22nd, 1963. To help us separate fact from myth, we are joined by one of the most respected and relentless researchers in this field, David K. Myers. He's an Emmy Award-winning animator, writer, investigative historian whose groundbreaking 3D recreation and decades of research have reshaped what we know about the moments surrounding Officer Tippit's death. His book, With Malice, Lee Harvey Oswald and the Murder of Officer J.D. Tippit, is considered a definitive deep dive into this case. Painstaking, controversial, and absolutely essential. Today we're going to explore why Tippit murder still matters, what the evidence actually reveals, and how misconceptions have survived for more than 60 years. So buckle up. This is the part of the JFK story you thought you knew, but maybe you don't. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios for the first time, Dale K. Myers. Welcome to the show. Well, it is the one and only Dale Myers, and I'm excited to have you here, sir.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I mean, it's been just a few years since the assassination of President Kennedy. We're coming up on the anniversary of his assassination, and I'm sure you've getting a lot of calls and saying, hey, I want you on the show. But no matter how much information they release with the government, it still doesn't answer questions. It's still not giving us the information we want or need that to call this case closed. So I want to dive right in and talk about, because you've spent decades dissecting one of the, this biggest moments in history, American history especially, of the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit. So everybody thought I was going to say JFK, and they're going to go, what are you talking about? But before we get into the evidence, I want to start with you. What was one of the biggest moments of this investigations that made you stop and say, this changes everything I thought I knew about the Tippit case, and tell me why that changed your mind?
Well, I think most people, as you sort of alluded to, don't even know who Officer Tippit was. They don't even know what part, that this is a key part, the heart, if you ask me,
right,
of the story. It's the heart of the case against Lee Harvey Oswald, certainly. So in a brief couple of sentences, Officer J.D. Tippit was a Dallas police officer who was shot and killed 45 minutes after President Kennedy was assassinated. Right. And he had stopped a man on a residential side street about 2.5 miles from the assassination scene. Apparently stopped to question him, because no one really knows what exactly transpired in terms of the conversation he had, but where the evidence shows that he stopped Oswald, got out of the car to question him. Oswald pulled a revolver, shot him 4 times, and fled the scene. And about 45 minutes after that, police converged on the Texas Theater, and they arrested Oswald for the shooting of J.D. Tippit. And when they got him back to police headquarters, as they walked him in, they were questioning employees of the Texas School Book Depository about the assassination. And several of those employees said, hey, that's Lee. And the police said, what? And they said, yeah, he works at the depository. Can you imagine what the police thought? They instantly knew they've got the prime suspect in the presidential assassination. And as it turned out, the evidence, all of the hard evidence that we have today, was gathered by the Dallas police in those first 48 hours. The evidence that has stood the test of time, evidence against Oswald in not only the Tippit shooting, but in the presidential assassination as well. So for me, in answer to your question, I sort of gravitated to this because in the early books that I read, which were Mark Lane's Rush to Judgment and
Right.
Thomas Buchanan's Who Killed Kennedy, all the early books that were out there. Of course, they were all conspiracy oriented. And when you first get into this case, you have no way to weigh, what is truthful and what is not, because you're not really sure. You're just getting information. And Mark Lane at the time had written the most about the Tippit shooting, I think about 14 pages. It was one chapter in his book, Rush to Judgment. And I thought that odd because all of these writers would refer to the Tippit shooting as being sort of the heart of the frame-up of the Dallas police, framing Lee Harvey Oswald for not only the Tippit shooting, they felt they framed him to show that he had a capacity for violence, and then, of course, then he obviously was framed for the Kennedy shooting as well. They always talked about this, but they never really got into the heart of the evidence. And so I thought, well, if this is is what they referred to it as, an obvious frame-up of Oswald in the Tippit shooting, well, this should be a slam dunk, because at that time, the early books I'm reading, again, they're all conspiracy-oriented. I'm thinking there's a conspiracy here. And so why not dive into this heart of the evidence? So I focused on the Tippit shooting early on in my research, never intending to write a book or anything like that. It was just more of a curiosity myself, just to satisfy my own interest. But the more I found, one of the first things I did is I ordered all of the documents that Mark Lane had listed in the back of his book. He listed the Warren Commission evidence that he was referring to. So I thought, well, let's see what else is in these documents. So I ordered the documents, and when I get them, I find not only is he taken things out of context, but he's just flat out lied about some of this stuff.
Oh, wow.
Some of the evidence in the documents that he's referring to don't say what he says at all. And so that, of course, whet my appetite for more. And as you know, Tony, you get into something like this, and pretty soon the ball starts rolling downhill, and there's no way to stop it.
So I mean, you're leaning towards Oswald was the shooter. So what was the most overlooked evidence that you think, especially in the Tippit murder, convinced you that Oswald was the shooter?
Well, the physical evidence and the eyewitness testimony. One of the guys that I interviewed was an eyewitness, Ted Calloway. I thought he was the best eyewitness to the shooting, and he actually didn't see the shooting. He saw Oswald fleeing the scene. So you had 11 people that either saw Oswald do the shooting, there were 3 of them, and then the rest of them saw him fleeing the immediate area, within a block or two of the shooting scene. And Ted Calloway was a used car salesman. He was a block away. He heard the 5 pistol shots. He was a U.S. Marine during World War II.
Right.
He was on Iwo Jima, served at Guadalcanal. I mean, this guy had been in combat. And he was a pistol instructor on the pistol range.
Oh, wow.
During the Korean War. So this guy knew the difference between a pistol shot and firecrackers. He immediately identified these 5 shots, and this was the interesting part. He said, I remember the cadence because it reminded me of Morse code. It was like bang, 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 bang. So in Morse code, that would be dash, dash, dot, dot, dot. And that's why he remembered that. So here I am talking to him in 1983 about this, and he's remembering it like, of course, it was yesterday. And he described that cadence, and I thought that's a pretty astute observation. Anyway, Oswald comes running down the street toward him, and is only about 56 feet away. He's across the street as he's fleeing. And Ted didn't know what was going on. He saw him running with the gun in a raised pistol position. So you're holding the pistol up like this. And he thought he was, Ted Calloway thought that Oswald was possibly a police undercover detective or something. He yells across the street to him, hey, man, what the hell is going on? And Oswald realized he was drawing attention to himself, kind of slowed up, turned toward Calloway, and kind of shrugged his shoulders and said something that Calloway couldn't quite understand, and then kind of slowed to a fast walk as he tucks the gun in his belt. And Calloway, of course, runs down to where he had heard the shots fired and discovers here's a police car and a policeman laying shot to death in the street. So I thought he was and Ted Calloway, without seeing Oswald's picture in the paper or on television, went down that night. So within 3 or 4 hours of the shooting, he's down there picking Oswald out of a lineup, said absolutely positively that was him. So, and there were a lot of eyewitnesses like Ted, but I found his testimony in 64 to the Warren Commission. Then I talked to him twice in 83 and 96. His story is virtually identical.
Wow.
And as you know, people that make stuff up, they can't remember what they lied about. They'll tend to change the details. Right. But now his story was pretty spot on. You know, minor changes in the sense of adding detail that wasn't previously given.
Right.
But he was a really good eyewitness. And then the other thing is they always talked about Oswald being framed by the police by switching these shells that they found. So Oswald discarded the shells at the scene. They recovered 4, and because a policeman named Gerald Hill had gone on the radio between the time of the shooting and Oswald's capture and described these shells as being automatics, and then, of course, they turn out to be .38 specials, which are not automatics and are fired in a revolver, not an automatic weapon. Suspicions were raised that, maybe the cops switched the shells. Look, they're describing them as automatics. There's Gerald Hill. He's a police officer. What? He doesn't know what an automatic shell looks like. He doesn't know the difference. That was the question. And, of course, I went about trying to answer these questions rather than just ask the question. Let's find out the answer. So I had interviewed Gerald Hill, and it turned out that he didn't know where the shells were actually found. They had actually been recovered by an eyewitness, given to another patrolman, and then the patrolman's now showing Gerald Hill these in a cigarette package, an empty cigarette package. And he didn't know that the shells had been picked up, right? He thought they were recovered right at the side of the car, which an automatic would eject the shells and they'd be found right there. He didn't know they'd been actually transported another 100 feet to the corner and dumped in some bushes. And so, not really looking at the shells, not examining them in any real manner, just looking in the package, seeing shells and thinking that they had been found right at the car, went on the radio and said they were automatics. And of course, they weren't. So the questions were raised over the years, many people, about these shells. So I went to the National Archives. No one had ever done that. I went to the National Archives. I brought a photographer with me, and we were going to photograph the markings, the police markings in the shells. One of the things that raised suspicions was that the patrolman that I just referred to that had the shells and showing them to Gerald Hill, he said, I believe I marked them. He said he couldn't swear that he marked them, but he thought he might have marked them. And then he described putting his initials, JMP, into the inside of the shell lip. And so I went there. And of course, during the Warren Commission testimony, he said, I can't find them. So everybody thought, they switched the shells. That's why you can't find his mark. So I go to the National Archives. We're looking at the shells. I photographed them. The photos are in my book. And as it turns out, if you know anything about firearms, a .38 shell, the opening is only about 1/4 of an inch in diameter and across. And so the markings are only made in the first, let's say, 1/8 of an inch inside because you can't see down in there any further, and you can't get a pen or anything in there to make a mark or scratch a mark. And also, nobody put 3 in it. There's not room to put 3 initials. When police mark shells, they put a mark that they could recognize as something they had done. It could be a single letter of an initial. It could be just an X. It could be whatever mark they would be able to identify. So I believe that Joe Poe, which was the JMP, I don't think he ever marked the shells. There's no evidence he ever marked the shells, and there was no actual reason for him to mark the shells. The crime scene officer, George Dowdy, the captain of the crime lab, was there at the scene. He turned the shells over to him. Dowdy could have easily went and testified. He would have said, I got these from Poe. Poe would have said, I got them from the eyewitness, and there's your chain of custody. So this idea that everybody needs to mark these shells, this is stuff you used to see on television in Perry Mason. There's an old reference,
but a good one.
But a good one.
Yeah.
So anyway, I discovered that and photographed the shells and the marks. But here's the main thing that I discovered is that 2 of the 4 shells, the chain of custody is solid, and those are marked by the officers who had them. And so the only reason they had suspicion was because Poe didn't supposedly mark the shells, and it doesn't seem to be evidence that he did. But this raises the question, all right, so if the cops switch the shells, why did they not switch all four? Why would they only switch these two and not these two? So the whole idea of shells being switched doesn't make any sense. For me, that sort of solidified, okay, that removes this key question in the chain of evidence. And, let's face it, Oswald caught red-handed with the gun that was used to fire those shells in his hand at the Texas Theater. Just 45 minutes after the Tippit shooting. So, the evidence is very strong against Oswald. Absolutely no question in my mind that he shot the police officer. And of course, that raises the question, well, if you weren't involved in the Kennedy assassination, then why are you shooting this police officer in cold blood, in broad daylight, in front of screaming witnesses? I mean, that shows somebody who's desperate not to be arrested.
No, I agree with that. And I know were also several witnesses claimed that Tippit was killed by two men, not just one. And so, first of all, just being able to interview a witness had to be pretty outstanding and exciting. Yes,
it was. And, you have to realize that when I was interviewing these people, this was early on.
That's what I mean.
My research. So I was thinking that some of these people could be involved in the big conspiracy.
Right.
So I would arrange my questions so that the question I thought might get them to hang up the phone on me would be the last question I would ask. So that way I could get most of the answers I was looking for. As it turned out, most of these people, Tony, you'd start talking to them and you would recognize the personality type as being like, oh, that's like my Uncle Jim, or, oh, that's like my grandpa. And so immediately the idea that these guys are all involved in some intricate, grand conspiracy where they're all working together to hide the truth, it melts away. It's just, you realize that what you used to believe was a lot of rubbish.
No, for sure. And how did you determine, or these witnesses that said there was two people, how did you clear that up?
Well, first off, there was only one person that ever said there was two witnesses.
Got it.
Everyone else described one shooter and one person fleeing the scene. So we had 11 eyewitnesses, one shooter, one person fleeing the scene. And the thing is that each eyewitness, they picked up the story of the fleeing man. So, in other words, one witness sees him leave the car and run around the corner. Then you have a cab driver who sees him run from the corner down toward Ted Calloway. Then Ted Calloway picks up, and here comes a guy toward him, and he goes around the next corner. So you have overlapping witnesses that are describing a single person, unless you believe that you have multiple people materializing and you're watching just your sequence, and then they disappear, and then another individual, you can come up with all kinds of crazy ideas. No, there's only one witness, and this witness is one of the furthest from the scene. Her name was Aquila Clemens. There's very little known about her story. And there was an early researcher who went down there and secretly recorded her, had a tape recorder in her purse and recorded this woman. And that's the only recording we really have, other than she was then filmed by Mark Lane in his film Rush to Judgment. But that interview was conducted based on this earlier audio recording. In other words, the questions were devised from that. And it's a very convoluted story, but you're not even sure, did the woman, she lived two doors down across the street and about more than 150 feet, because that was to the corner. Then you got two more lots. So that's another 30, 60 feet. So you're talking close to about 210 feet away. And we're not sure, was she on the porch when the shooting happened? Did she hear the shots and then come out onto the porch? Not really sure whether she actually saw the shooting or heard the shots and then came out and saw the aftermath.
Right.
But in her description, she describes one man fleeing the scene and coming toward her and going down Patton. But then she said the other person was running in the opposite direction, which of course doesn't match anything, other than there was an eyewitness who had come out, had heard Helen Markham, one of the eyewitnesses who was screaming, come outside. He was standing precisely where Aquila Clemens said there was this second person. And he then, she said, ran away from her down 10th Street. But if he had come out and and walked a house or two toward the intersection, toward Helen Markham, who was screaming, and he was responding to that, to hear what she was screaming about or whatever, and then turned and started running back toward his house, that would certainly fit exactly what Aquila Clemens is describing. So, some of these stories grow legs over the years, and this one certainly has, where when you get right down to it, there's not a whole lot there that you can really bite into. And then ultimately her claim is overruled, if you will, by 11 other eyewitnesses whose story does fit sort of together and debunks basically what she's saying. So now there's only one shooter, and there isn't another accomplice that's nearby.
I one thing I do appreciate what we've done is majority of the conversations that I've had with people that we've talked about the conspiracy theory is the actual event of the assassination of Kennedy, and then the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald. So there's a big timeline in between that we don't really talk about. And one thing that you analyzed the timeline between Kennedy's assassination and Tippit murder in pretty good detail. So what was the most compelling fact that rules out alternative suspects in that narrow window? Because, we've heard the grassy knoll, we've heard so many different things. What, in your opinion, in your research, how do we rule out a lot of other potential suspects?
Are we talking about the Kennedy assassination as a whole, or the Tippit shooting
from the time that he was assassinated till Tippit? So, like you said, we kind of ruled out the second shooter of Tippit because maybe she just walked out and saw somebody running because of the shot instead of being part of this. So, in that timeline, what is a fact that we can kind of rule out there was nobody else after the fact of Kennedy being shot until Tippit? Because there was no other witnesses anywhere else saying that, like you said, Tippit, there was a third person or two people. So all that has been ruled out, not just you, but even other researchers, correct? There has not been any other suspects after the Kennedy assassination.
Well, there's no other suspects other than Oswald. Right. You can go out in the street right now and ask somebody, what do you think about the Kennedy assassination, conspiracy or not? The 90% will say conspiracy.
Oswald. Well, yes, for sure.
Right? 90% will say conspiracy. And then you say, well, okay, so who did it? Who was behind it? And everybody has their favorite, villain. It's the CIA. It's Big Oil. It's LBJ. It's the Cuban exiles, whoever. And then you ask them the next question. They can't answer this one. And that question is, so what's the connection between that group and Oswald? And they can't answer it because Oswald was a loner. He was really the first sociopath. We would recognize him today as a typical mass shooter, somebody who's been disenfranchised their whole life, been kicked around, feels that they haven't been given their due, that there's somebody to be reckoned with. That sort of personality. And for me, talking about the timeline, the thing that rules out other people really is the timeline, is the chronology itself. When you put things, I found in doing research, when you put things in chronological order, a lot of things suddenly melt away. Things that seem suspicious suddenly aren't that suspicious at all.
Right.
And in this case, things are happening so fast, it's unbelievable. For instance, I'm working on a really lengthy project right now that's taken about 10 years into this thing, which is putting together a compendium of all the films and photographs that were taken from the time the presidential limousine drives into Dealey Plaza all the way through the entire weekend. Right?
Oh, wow.
All the way through Jack Ruby shooting Oswald, all the broadcast films, everything. And putting it in chronological order, which is sort of it's a fun puzzle to get involved with. But one of the things that you find out is how quick everything happens. Do you know that nobody even ran toward the grassy knoll till about 30 seconds after the shooting? And what precipitated that was a Dallas police officer who parked his bike at the curbside and started running up there. And then people started running up to see what he was running up after. And then people started running after those people to see what they were running up there after. So you had this whole conglomerate of spectators running, and most of them don't even know why they're running. They're just thinking something's about to happen and I want to be there. So they run up to the corner of the fence, and within 2.5 minutes, the sheriff's deputies that have run up there, along with the police, they start about 30 seconds after the shooting, and they all arrive there within a minute or so. But within 2.5 minutes of being up there, they immediately rule out there's nothing here. There's nothing here to. And by then, there are other spectators coming up saying, look, I saw a rifle in this window in this building over here. So they began to refocus, and within 3 minutes, they're now focused on the Texas School Book Depository. So the idea that, the police ran up there and there was this big, long investigation before they realized that there was no shooter or that there was no evidence of a shooter, which gave the shooter plenty of time to get away. No, none of that happened. This stuff happened fast. And then you have the entire story of Oswald himself, the most politically astute person easily that's employed at this building. Here's the president of the United States is going to drive right by everybody in the building at lunchtime. They go out to watch this happen, and he doesn't. I mean, if there's one guy that should be going out there to, if he hated Kennedy, to boo him when he drives by, and if he liked him, to cheer him when he drives, he doesn't do any of that. Not only that, but he's not with anyone else. So he has no alibi for the time of the shooting. And then, and this is the thing that got all the police keyed up, he leaves the building almost immediately. Now, when a fire truck pulls down your street and pulls over 3 doors down, everybody comes out and goes over there and hangs out, and they hang out until they find out what happened and what's going on.
Yeah.
And what happened in Dealey Plaza? Well, that's exactly what happened. You had people in the immediate area, the couple of blocks there, pour into that plaza, and they're all hanging out. There's tons of films and photos that show all this. Not all those people were there at the time of the shooting. It was actually a sparse crowd at the time of the shooting, but it filled up immediately because the looky-loos show up, and that's what happens. What does Oswald do? He doesn't come outside and hang out with the looky-loos. I mean, even if he's inside packing some boxes to fill an order, which is what he was employed to do, and he missed the shooting, you would think he would naturally come out to see what happened. But no, he leaves the building within 3 minutes, walks up the street about 6 blocks, stops a bus that's coming in the opposite direction, and not at a bus stop. He stops a bus in the middle of the block, gets on the bus. He's on the bus only a couple of minutes when it gets snarled up in the traffic that's now backing up from the assassination scene. A woman gets off, takes a transfer because she's going to miss her train ride at Union Station. Oswald comes up right behind her, also asks for a transfer. This becomes a key point in the Tippit shooting, too. Leaves the bus, walks several blocks south to the Greyhound bus station, and grabs a taxi to take him home to his room. Now, let me just stop right there. Oswald didn't drive, didn't have a car. He was a very frugal person, and he rode public transportation religiously. Him stopping to take a cab home would be like you or me calling a limousine service at the end of the day and taking that home. So highly unusual and certainly showing signs of flight. He then has the cab driver not drop him at his room. He has him drive him past his room, and about 3 or 4 blocks south, he has him drop him off. So there's signs of deception. He doesn't want the cabbie to remember where exactly he dropped this guy off or that it related to that rooming house. Oswald then doubles back, runs into his room past the landlady, or not the landlady, the housekeeper, and she says, wow, you sure are in a hurry. He doesn't say anything, which was not unusual. He rarely talked. Goes in his room. She says he's in there just long enough to grab a jacket, and by his own admission, he told the police he grabbed his pistol, puts it in his belt, and leaves the rooming house. About 12 to 13 minutes later, he's gunning down J.D. Tippit on that side street on 10th Street in Oak Cliff, which is only about a block or so from the only bus stop where that bus transfer he had in his pocket that he took earlier was good for. And that bus would have taken him south out of town. He could have grabbed a Greyhound bus. He had just enough money, and he could have made it to the Mexico border. Now, nobody knows if that's what was his plan.
Right.
For some reason, he never made good the bus transfer, but that's just an interesting fact that fits in there. He guns down the police officer. Cops pour into the area searching for the cop killer. Oswald manages to slink his way down the street about 6 blocks, slips into the Texas Theater. Now, right before that, he slips into this vestibule of a shoe store, and he's feigning interest in the shoes, and the sirens are screaming behind him. He's looking over his shoulder, and the shoe store manager, Johnny Brewer, he's about 20 years old. He thinks, wow, that guy's acting a little suspicious. And after the cops do a U-turn and speed off in the other direction, Oswald looks over his shoulder and goes in the opposite direction. So the shoe store manager comes out onto the sidewalk, and now he's looking at Oswald walking up the street toward the Texas Theater. It's about 100 feet up the street. Now, in the meantime, the ticket taker has come out of the box office, and she's stepped out to the curb, and she's looking up the street in the direction where a police car has just gone, and she's thinking the siren was winding down. She's thinking he's stopping right up the street. So now Oswald's in between these two people, and Johnny Brewer just happens to see him slip into the theater behind her back. So he knew the ticket taker, Julia Postal. Brewer walks up the street. He says, hey, that guy buy a ticket earlier? And she realizes that she remembers out of her peripheral vision a guy coming up the street, but he never passed her. And now she realizes he must have gone in the theater. So, of course, they go in to make sure that no one's left the building. I say they. Johnny Brewer goes in. He comes back out, says, no, I think he's still in there. I can't see him, but I think he's still in there. So they call the cops. And that's the reason the police come down there, because they think, now, I talk about they, I'm talking about Julia Postal and Johnny Brewer. Brewer said that he had heard on the radio that an officer had been shot in Oak Cliff. And so he thought it might be involved with that. Julia Postal didn't know about the cop shooting and thought it had to do with the presidential assassination.
Right.
So that's why the police storm in there. But now look at Oswald's actions, all these desperate things. And one of the things people point to is that before he left the building, he was encountered, Oswald, in a second floor lunchroom by a police officer that was in the motorcade. Do you know the story?
No. Tell me about that one.
Marion Baker was a police officer riding in the motorcade. And so he's back on Houston Street as the limousine turns the corner. The shots are fired. He looks ahead. He's looking at the face of the book depository. He sees pigeons fly off the roof. So he thinks the gunman is shooting from up on the roof. So he guns his motorcycle toward the front entrance, runs into the front entrance. The building manager, Roy Truly, follows him. He says, how do I get to the roof? Roy Truly says, follow me. They go kitty corner to the opposite corner, the northwest corner of the building, and there's 2 freight elevators there. Truly is pushing the button, trying to get the freight elevators to come down. If you leave the gate open and you push the button, they'll automatically come down. But somebody's left the gate open on the 5th floor, so they won't come down automatically. He's hollering up the shaft, hey, close the gate. Finally, he says, let's just take the stairs. So they start up the stairs. And as they round the 2nd floor landing, Roy Truly's ahead of the police officers. As the officer steps up to the 2nd floor landing, he spots this movement through a little window that leads into a vestibule. And it's just a movement moving away from him. So he draws his gun, goes in there, and the vestibule is immediately adjacent to a lunchroom. And here's Oswald standing there at a Coke machine. He apparently has just walked in, hasn't got the Coke yet. And the cop pulls the gun. He's got it on him, and he says, come here. And Oswald looks a little surprised. He comes toward him, and by then, Roy Truly realizes, hey, the cop's not following me. He doubles back, comes in behind the cop. He's looking over his shoulder. He sees Oswald. He says, no, he's okay. He works here. So he kind of vouches for Oswald unknowingly. And then the two, Truly and the cop, continue on to the roof. Oswald then gets the Coke, exits the lunchroom through that little vestibule and into an outer office, and a woman who's a secretary who's been watching the parade comes up to her desk just as Oswald's coming into the room and says there's been shots fired at the president. He kind of mumbled something and he leaves. Now, we believe he left the building within 60 seconds of that encounter. But what people point to is that encounter with the police officer. Oswald seemed surprised. The cop said he wasn't out of breath. He seemed calm. So he didn't really think, and once the Roy Truly, the manager, vouched for him, he didn't think anything of it. And so the conspiracy folks like to point, and having been one, see, I sort of know where all the skeletons are buried. I know what all the arguments are. So they say, well, look how calm he was. How could he then shoot up. I mean, he's encountered by a cop. 45 minutes later, you're seeing he guns down this police officer in a panic. How is that possible? He was calm 90 seconds after this encounter in the lunchroom. They timed it and figured it happened about 90 seconds after the assassination. How could Oswald be calm 90 seconds after the shooting and then panic 45 minutes later? Well, think about it. Oswald hasn't been watching television or listening to the radio like everyone else. He doesn't know what's happened in the last 45 minutes. He doesn't know, did somebody see me in the window? Did one of the employees report me? Did the cop that I encountered in the lunchroom, has he already reported me? Have they gone to the file and found my address? Are they looking for me? Are they staked out at my house? He has no idea. So when the police car is approaching him on 10th Street, he has no idea. Does this guy know who I am? Is this guy looking for me specifically? And when J.D. Tippit pulls over and then gets out of the car to question him, Oswald does panic because consciousness of guilt in his own mind, he feels guilty. And so he's thinking, this cop is going to arrest me and I can't let that happen.
I was curious why Tippit chose Lee Harvey to question.
To stop?
Yeah.
Nobody really knows. Obviously, Tippit is the only one who would really know.
That's the problem. We won't know.
And the Warren Commission, they speculate as well. There was a description that fit Oswald, 5'10", 150 pounds, slender build. But that's, the conspiracy folks argued, well, that fits a lot of people. And they're right. That would fit a lot of people. That can't be the only reason. Now, in my book, I ran across an interesting thing with the witnesses of the Tippit shooting. Prior to Tippit pulling Oswald over, you had numerous witnesses that said Oswald was walking west on 10th Street and Tippit is driving east, so they're coming toward each other. Then you had another group of witnesses that said as Tippit is pulling his car over, Oswald is walking east. So they're both moving in the same direction and Tippit is overtaking Oswald. And so for years, people were arguing, okay, so which is it? The Warren Commission said it was the former, that Tippit's overtaking Oswald. He's walking east on 10th Street. And then you had a lot of conspiracy people say, no, it's the guy walking west. And that means it can't be Oswald because he hasn't got time to get from his rooming house to some point west and to be coming back and so forth and so on. So they ended up with two camps. And it occurred to me, wait a minute now. The moment when the witnesses are saying that there's a change in direction occurs just as Tippit is pulling the guy pulling over toward the man walking on the sidewalk. What if both groups of witnesses are correct? You don't eliminate one group. Right. No, they're both right. The guy is walking west. And as they're coming toward each other, Oswald spots the approaching squad car, Tippit, and does a quick about face and starts walking in the opposite direction, which would be something that would look suspicious. So in addition to the meager description, then you have this overt action that appears suspicious. And then, according to the witnesses, Oswald, they're not sure. Did Tippit call him to the car? Did he come over on his own volition? Not sure. He walks over to the passenger side and he's leaning down. They have like a 10-second conversation. There's an open vent window. And they're kind of talking, and then Tippit gets out of the car. Well, when Oswald bent down and looked through the car window, he's got a zipper jacket on. He's been double timing in the last 13 minutes to make almost 9/10 of a mile. He'd be sweating.
Oh, I was going to say.
And his hair would be wet. And that would look suspicious to an officer who would be thinking, well, why would you just take your jacket off? If you're so hot you're sweating, why would you just carry the jacket? So it's those kinds of things that police officers are trained to watch for. And I don't think Tippit thought he's stopping the presidential assassin, obviously, or he would have been ready for it.
Right.
And he was caught off guard.
Well, one thing I do, because time is flying, but one thing I want to talk about is the 3D recreation of the crime scene, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
You sent me a picture of the actual motorcade of President Kennedy and Governor, I can't remember his last name, but
Governor Conley, Texas Governor Conley,
So can you explain how
that's the single bullet.
Yes.
Right? That's the single bullet theory, which to me, we use the words theory and hypothetical hypothesis interchangeably, and we shouldn't. A theory is something that you're theorizing happened with no real evidence to go one way or the other. And a hypothesis is something that you suspect might have happened. So let's look at the evidence and test it. And then you either reject it or not. And in my case, what I did is that I came up with this idea of doing a 3D recreation of the Zapruder film. This is back in 1993. I had rudimentary computer tools to work with at the time. But I had had the idea years before there was even computers available. Because the handheld nature of the Zapruder film made it very difficult to see what the hell was actually happening in the film. And I actually thought years ago of getting two friends, sitting them in a folding chair, and then taking the Zapruder film. I had a little Super 8 viewer, and I could crank it frame by frame. And I was going to pose my two friends in the positions of Kennedy and Connally and then film it with a single frame 8mm camera, and I was basically going to reanimate the Zapruder film frame by frame, and then I'd be able to play it back very smoothly and see what motion is happening in real time, what that would look like. Of course, I never ended up doing that. It was just an idea. So you flash forward 10 years, and all of a sudden, here's a computer program that would allow me to do it even better. I could actually bring in each frame of the Zapruder film and kind of look through it like a transparency, and I could align it to three-dimensional models built that match the actual sizes of what we're seeing in the film, and it could be exact. Right? Exact within a tolerance where the error factor wouldn't really make any difference, wouldn't change anything. And so I ended up doing that. It took 6 months to build the models, and I think it was 6 weeks to actually align all 486 frames of the Zapruder film to the model. But when I got done, I remember it was a Wednesday night when I had enough information. I thought, hey, I got enough right now. I could do a trajectory analysis. And determine whether the single bullet worked, and if it did, where did the bullet come from? Because, even at the time, again, I was still a conspiracy theorist. So I'm thinking, it might go back to the Dell Tex building or the record building. Who knows? So it was about 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. For some reason, that sticks in my mind. I don't remember the date. But I remember I know I can't go to sleep now until I do this. So I sat up for another 2 hours and set up a line and basically projected it from Connally's back wound backward through Kennedy's throat wound. So those are your 2 points. And then extended that line rearward and see where it falls. And it went right back through the 6th floor sniper's nest window. Believe me, I was more floored than anyone. And of course, naively thinking, at that time there were these forums just starting up. There were BBS boards and so forth that you could connect with people. I thought, wow, people are going to read these conspiracy theorists. They'll be really interested in this finding because, now we can, there might still be a conspiracy, but you can forget about the single bullet. It's actually true. Right. Yeah, that was naive, Dale. So
I was going to say,
I put this out there, and oh my God, they just hammered me, and they're still hammering me today. They don't know what
they're going to say. You're part of. You're part of it.
Yes, I'm part of it. I sold out for money and just all kinds of nutty stuff. Yeah. And the thing is, Tony, none of these people ever contacted me or bothered to come over and look at what I actually did. Just all these accusations based on falsehoods. Things about, he inflated the size of the figures. He's changing on the fly. He's changing the size and the relationship. I'm not. That would take even more work. It was enough work just to do it the correct way, let alone to fake it. And what would be the point in faking it? So anyway, it turns out that that was one of the main things that convinced me personally that there's one shooter in the plaza. And of course, what I did is just a visual representation of what the Warren Commission had done in 1964 with the forensic and the medical evidence. Look, most murders are not captured on film. Right. People think the Zapruder film adds to our knowledge, and it actually detracts because it allows people to speculate about things because the film is silent, as most people know. So you don't hear the gunshots, which means, okay, now we have to base the shooting sequence on what we think are the reaction times of the men as they're hit. And of course, there's all kinds of dispute. Even Connally couldn't pinpoint the moment he's hit. And so all the Zapruder film does is add questions. It can't really, you got a very narrow window that you're looking through. And so the 3D model that I did, I thought would help open that up. We can now move the camera off Zapruder's pedestal. We can now view the shooting sequence in 3 dimensions from any standpoint. We can look through the eyes of any particular eyewitness. We can be the sniper in the book depository. We can be the supposed grassy knoll gunman and see what he would have seen. And so when you start doing that, you realize, okay, this doesn't work medically or forensically. All the shots are shown forensically to have been fired from behind both Kennedy and Conley. And the physical evidence, the ballistics evidence, the shells were found underneath the sniper's nest window. 3 shells. They're fired in the rifle that they found, 20 minutes later on the 6th floor. That rifle was bought and owned by Lee Harvey Oswald. He's photographed with it. Now we've got a whole new debate of what you have, Tony, is the internet has kept a lot of this stuff alive. So you get the newcomers to the case that are stumbling on these old arguments, and they don't know they've been debunked. And so there they are making the arguments again that have been debunked 1,000 times. I'm hearing that the rifle, the backyard photos of Oswald holding the rifle have been faked once again. No, they're not faked. They're real. His wife took them.
Yeah. That's
his rifle. He ordered it. He left the building. This is a clear-cut case. If this had not been a famous person being shot, right, such some crazed nut takes a rifle up at a building one day and fires at traffic moving below him, this would have been an open and shut case a long time ago. But because it's a president of the United States, and because Oswald is such a waif, such an insignificant figure, of course he did this and he's become a significant figure, has led us to this point where it's 62 some years later, and here we are. We're still talking about this. And 100 years from now, they'll still be talking about it.
All right, so I think the assassination and Tippit being killed kind of goes together. I think what really threw people into even the conspiracy theory more, and I want to know your thoughts, is when Jack Ruby steps in and kills Oswald. Then it's like, okay, there's a reason why Jack Ruby did this right in front of the cameras, right next to the police, to get rid of maybe
that's right.
Somebody spilling the beans on a bigger conspiracy.
we've got to silence Oswald. And of course that's what everybody thought in 1964 when that happened. That's why everyone jumped to the conclusion that it was a conspiracy. And you know what? They thought it was a conspiracy of Ruby and Oswald together to kill Kennedy, and then Ruby has to silence Oswald. Now, when you start to examine the whole thing, of course, just on its face, it makes no sense. Oswald's been talking behind closed doors for 48 hours.
Right.
You don't wait 48 hours and then kill the guy. But needless to say, the main piece of evidence against that whole theory, the theory that Oswald's in on it with Oswald, is, first off, there's no link between the two men. But more important, in terms of the timing of Ruby shooting Oswald, the timing is such that it can't be planned. Ruby goes down to the Western Union office to send a $25 money order to one of his strippers. And it's way down there. He passes the entrance and he sees a lot of activity and thinks, well, maybe they haven't transferred Oswald yet. And so if he's a hitman for the mob or whoever, and he's there to kill Oswald, he certainly wouldn't have been sitting in bed at 10:30 when the cops had announced, be here by 10 and you won't miss anything. If you're a hitman, you don't miss the window. So instead, Ruby sends the money order, which is time-stamped, 11:17. He then walks, and it takes him 3-4 minutes to get down into the basement, and then Oswald's coming out right then. He's in the basement less than 30 seconds when Oswald makes his appearance and is then shot. As Ruby himself said, I couldn't have timed it better if I'd have planned it, because there's no way to plan that. So then, of course, you had speculation about, okay, the cops are phoning, they're going to tip off Ruby. I had college students one year, I was doing a lecture, and I said, and they said, oh, I got a question. How come why don't they just, no, this is back in the pager days. Why don't they page Ruby?
Oh, God.
It's like, it's 1963, people, wake up. It's technology. The only way to get a hold of Ruby is you have to call a payphone. There are no payphones. He's waiting in line at the Western Union office behind someone. I mean, if the person in front of him takes 2 minutes or 30 seconds more, he's going to miss the shooting. So, and then Ruby described the activity of the police car leaving that coming up the wrong way on the entrance ramp. He described who was in the car within an hour of the shooting. So how could he know that unless he actually witnessed that and saw that? So anyway, the totality of the evidence is that Ruby was a hothead. He was a hothead and a kind of a blabbermouth. And I met one guy that knew him personally. He said, if you told Ruby a secret at one end of the block, he says, I guarantee you by the time he got to the other end of the block, he would have told 3 people. So he's not the kind of person that you would have trusted. I think the mob, when I say the mob, he had some connections with organized crime because he had a strip club and the girls were run by organized crime. So he had to deal with, but he wasn't a high level hitman or anything. In fact, one mobster, I think he even said, we wouldn't hire him to hit an effing dog. So it just, not the kind of personality. But I understand why people jumped to that conclusion at the beginning when it first happened, because they didn't know the whole background of Jack Ruby. I honestly
think if Jack Ruby would have, I think it still would have been there of the conspiracies, but I think it wouldn't have been such a intense as it has been for the last 6
years. And a lot of people forget that, he got congratulatory telegrams. Joe Citizen would send in, thanks, you did what I would have done. There were a lot of people in America that would like to have gotten their hands on Oswald. And it turned out that Jack Ruby just happened to be the guy that did. Now, I'm kind of smirking, but I'm smirking at the idea, not the act. It was a terrible act. Yeah. What a dumb thing to do. And even the cops said, you didn't do us any favors by killing Oswald. And I think a lot of what would have come out at trial would have ended all the speculation. Not every minute piece of it, but a lot of it would have gone by the wayside had there been the trial that we needed. And I think Oswald would have grandstanded. I think he would have eventually told why he did it. And so because that motive is now forever murky, we can guess what the motive probably was. And it was something as simple as, I'm somebody to be reckoned with, and I'm going to show you. And opportunity presented itself in the Kennedy motorcade, driving past the building in which he worked. He took advantage of that opportunity. And, people say, my God, what a crazy thing. A president riding in an open car. Why would they do that? It's like, no, you think it's crazy now because of that this happened.
Right.
That's why you think it's crazy now. But at the time, nobody thought that was crazy. They thought it was maybe a little dangerous, but nobody thought in their wildest imaginations that somebody would do what Oswald did. So, yeah, Jack Ruby didn't do anyone any favors by killing Oswald. And if anything, he's perpetuated the very thing that he probably hoped to eliminate, which was to pay back Oswald for what he felt he did. And once again, taking justice in your own hands is not a smart thing.
No. And I know someone like yourself that's been working on this subject for how many years? 30, 40?
No, 50.
50 years?
50 plus, yeah. Unfortunately, I'm 50, and I don't wish this on anyone.
Right.
But I do understand I tell people I've gone all the way around the barn. I started with the idea of conspiracy, and I think most people, that's where you start because that's where most of the books are talking about. But if you get past the books and the magazine articles and go to the original sources, read the original stuff, eventually you come back around and it's like picking up sand on a beach. Right. Eventually it all runs through your hands and you end up with nothing. And so everybody has to make their own journey. So while I can appreciate people that are clinging to the single bullet theory, despite the evidence, I say, all right, great, just stick with it. And I think you'll realize that you're wrong.
Is there anything left to, like any loose ends or anything left unsolved in your mind about this? Because with the new release of documents from the Warren Commission and other things.
Yeah, well, let me say this about these new releases. There's nothing in there.
No, look, I knew there was.
9 million pages were released by 1970. Most people don't know this. All the Warren Commission stuff was released by the end of 69. And then the FBI files were released over time. House Select Committee, even more files were generated and then released. The stuff they're releasing now is really in the weeds. They're not talking about physical evidence. So there's no new stuff there. All that stuff, we know all that stuff. And so what we've got is stuff really far in the weeds. The friend of a friend of a friend and his social security number is blacked out. Or, it's stuff like that. Or it's sources and methods that intelligence agencies are still using. And in a lot of cases, they were in the Cuban exile community, a lot of these anti-Castro Cuban types, they were young bucks at the time. They were 20 years old.
Yeah.
So they're potentially still alive. They might be in their mid-80s, but they're still alive. And their families are still in Cuba. So there's a lot of reasons to keep some of the stuff secret. None of the stuff being kept secret. A lot of these documents, we've actually seen the documents. We just haven't seen the redaction.
Right.
And it turns out, okay, it's a number, a code number, or it's a social security number. So the idea that, there's a smoking gun document still out there that's hidden, or that we're going to discover, there was a secret CIA operation that was running Oswald. No, there's nothing like that. You're not going to see that. And in fact, even if there's 10,000 documents still left, you can't undo the 9 million pages of documents that we already have, right? You already have this 9 million page truth. You can't undo that. You might color it. You might find little things that we didn't know that give you maybe a slightly different inkling of what was going on, but you're not going to undo whole truths about this. No, what we know about the Kennedy assassination is pretty much historically ground in fact. You had one person, one shooter, Lee Harvey Oswald, did the shooting for reasons that will be forever obscure his exact motive, although we can guess. It was definitely a political shooting. I don't think he just on a lark, just shooting whoever happens to drive by. He's shooting Kennedy because I think he viewed Kennedy as being the arch nemesis of his hero, Fidel Castro. And I think in his twisted brain that he somehow thought that he could become a hero of the Castro revolution by eliminating the president. And but as far as a motive, that'll forever be obscure. But as far as the mechanics of what happened, Tony, we know what happened. We have known for a long time.
Yeah. Well, I hope people, if they haven't read your book, I hope they pick it up. It's with Malice, Lee Harvey Oswald, and I can't read my.
That's the murder of Officer J.D. Tippit.
Oh, there we go. I didn't wear my glasses to read, so I couldn't.
And
read
that blue edition there was a very limited number that were run. About 500 copies were printed in 2013 for the 50th anniversary. They're very hard to come by. I've yet to see even one on for sale on eBay.
Wow.
You do see the earlier edition, the 1998 release. It's sort of a burnt orange cover. And you do see those come up from time to time. But the blue cover, it's got 150 pages in addition to the first edition.
Nice.
That has the entire. I had contacted the J.D. Tippit family photos. His whole backstory is in. So that edition is really the one you want if you can find one.
Well, I do appreciate you including Officer Tippit. I think he deserves his moment also because he was just doing his job, doing his duty, and unfortunately his life was taken. So, well, what's next? I know you're always doing something. So what's next for you? What do you?
Well, I'm working on this compendium, which still has a little bit to go, but I think it'll be a useful tool for researchers in the future to see how all these films and photos that you've seen in every documentary, and then some stuff you've never seen, how this all fits together, and really. If you sit down and watch it in real time, 90% of the stuff that we've seen in these documentaries goes by in the first hour and a half after the shooting. And if you watch it in real time, you really get a sense of, wow, this really was a blur. I've talked to many people, cops, eyewitnesses, that, you're talking to them 20, 30 years after the fact, and, you're asking for these details that they couldn't possibly remember, but, you're hoping.
Right.
And they inevitably describe it as, wow, it was a big blur. I mean, I have specific moments that I remember, but it's like anything else, even your own memories, Tony. I mean, you probably could tell me what you had for breakfast this morning, but if I asked you, what'd you have for breakfast a month ago, you probably couldn't tell me. And then here I'm asking somebody, even though it was a traumatic event, I'm asking them 20 or 30 years after the fact, hey, can we walk through this, what you did that day, second by second? Well, they really can't. But they do remember interesting nodules that when you put them together with everyone else's story, you sort of get this tapestry of interwoven truth that does inform you about what really happened. So
no, I agree. Thinking of things where, when you're a kid and you break your arm, I remember breaking my arm, but I don't remember everything. I don't remember who was there. I don't remember what I was wearing. There's a lot of things that you just don't remember, but you do remember the tragedy of it. So I think that's where a lot of people probably hold on to the tragedy versus everything else around it.
And history is interesting, and this is easily one of the most fascinating historic events, certainly in my lifetime. So,
well, Dale, thank you so much for being part of Truth Be Told. I so appreciate it. I hope you come back again. I think
I'd love to.
You're a great storyteller, by the way. I could sit there and listen to you and just tell the stories, because I feel like I'm watching a documentary.
I've got hours and hours of more stories. So.
Well, I appreciate you. And how do people find you? I mean, Instagram, website?
JDTippit.com is a website that's devoted to the shooting of Officer Tippit and his story. So JDTippit.com. JFKfiles.com deals with my computer work. And then there's JFK Files, a blog spot, where I have continuing blog articles that I write, and so you can keep up that way.
Perfect. And so I'll put that in the show notes so people can find you. Thank you, Dale. I appreciate it, and I hope you come back. But everybody, please, thank you so much for tuning in. Again, here every Friday, 3 o'clock. And we bring these amazing authors and researchers and specialists to bring you history from the paranormal world and American history, world history that keeps on living. And it's living through us by just acknowledging that these amazing things in our world happens every day. And so we appreciate the people that keep it going. So, but until next time, I'm Tony Sweet. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Listen to us on Apple and Spotify. And until next time, take care of yourself and each other. Bye.